Okay, good morning. This is a recording of a walking talking mock, so you can have a practice in preparation for your exams using an actual GCSE exam paper. So you can complete each question after we've talked through it and we'll review your answers. Okay, so let's get started with question 1. So the first thing you want to do in the exam is you want to go to the source. You want to read the section that's in the top that tells you a little bit about it, and then you want to look at question 1. So question 1 is, for this exam, read again the first part of source A from lines 1 to 9. So remember, some parts of the question will never change. It will always be read again the first part of the source, and it will be a small section from there. And you're being asked today to list 4 things, that never changes, about the area that Ruby cycles through from this part of the source. It is always worth 4 marks. So you may want to make sure that you box or highlight around the lines that you're looking at to make sure that you don't veer off there, because you won't get any marks. You want to read the question very carefully, make sure that you answering the question correctly. You're not being asked about Ruby or her bike, you're being asked about the area that Ruby cycles through. So students most often miss out on marks by listing irrelevant information or not answering the question correctly. It's only worth 4 marks. You get 5 minutes to do it. And what you should do is set yourself a timer for 5 minutes. Once that 5 minutes is up, you can move on to answering question 2. What happens if you finish this question in 2 minutes? You then go to question 2, you start looking at the extract that you're going to be given, start identifying what you might talk about before you begin answering that question. So pause this video now and complete question 1. Okay, so let's see what you did. So it would have looked like this in the exam paper, and you will have listed your 4 things. What I want you to check is, did you write in full sentences? Every sentence must be a full sentence. So you can't just put tree. You must put there is a singular tree in the area. Okay, so make sure that every time you're writing in full sentences, have you done that? Have you only answered from lines 1 to 9? Just give a check. And have you talked about the area? So these are the answers that you could have got. So you could have said there was a lone tree. You could have said the tree grew out of a raised piece of land. You could have said this was the only raised piece of land in more than 100 miles. You could have said the tree was bent sideways by the wind. You could have said the tree was a good landmark. You could have said the telegraph poles were also a landmark. The tree grew out of rock, or the rock consisted of heavy stones. Any other valid responses you would be able to check from the sources, but those are the main ones. So give yourself a mark out of 4. How did you do? Okay, so let's move on to question 2. So if you do have an extra minute or 2 from question 1, you go straight to this part and you start having a look at what the question's asking you to do. So this one says, look in detail at this extract from lines 10 to 16. They will always give you a sectioned off box here to work with so that you're answering the right bit. So it will always ask you to analyse the language techniques and the methods. So those are your similes, your metaphors, your adjectives, your semantic fields, all those things we talked about in class. You're just talking about the words. So very much here the question is, how does the writer use language to describe the tornado? You want to read the question very carefully, make sure that you're talking about the tornado itself and not Ruby, because there's quite a few bits of this section that talk very much about Ruby, and it's not about Ruby, it's about the tornado. It's only worth 8 marks, so you do not want to be going over on your time. So you're going to spend about between 2 and 5 minutes reading and annotating and labelling, and then you're going to move on to answering this question. I always say, what you want to do is the first time highlight any interesting things that you can see about this tornado. Then I want you to think of, do you know what those techniques are? Remember, some things have multiple meanings. So for example, or multiple techniques. You've got this sentence here, she ran like the devil himself were chasing her. Well, you've got religious imagery, you've got a simile, you've got the repetition of ran, you've got the verb chasing. Different people will see different things. So what I want you to do now is I want you to pause this video and I want you to pick which quotes you would look at, I want you to identify the language techniques. I want you to say what maybe those techniques do, what's the effect of those techniques. And then, as I always say in class, pick the highest leverage one. What's the one you can say most about? If you can't say anything about it, you need to discount it. Okay, so pause the video now and have a look at which quotations you would use. Okay, so just in case you need that a bit bigger, you've got this slide here where you can see it with an explanation of the task on. Pause the video now, highlight the key vocabulary in this section. What can you say about it? What does those techniques do? Okay, so hopefully you've written something. What I might have done if I was annotating, I might have picked something like this and picked the quote that I highlighted a minute ago. And I might write around it what techniques have been used and what that does. So for example, this simile here of comparing the tornado to this bestial image, you know, like it's a dog, like it's biting at her ankles, and these images of hell and the devil, this really shows that the tornado is evil. So I could talk about that. I'm very interested in my ing words. My classes will know that. They're always verbs, okay? So you can always think about what does that verb do? So the fact that the tornado is biting, it personifies the tornado. It implies that it's an aggressive, attacking beast. The fact that it's at her ankles implies just how close Ruby is to being consumed by it, which increases the tension as the reader hopes she will escape unscathed. So obviously we don't want a 13-year-old girl attacked by a tornado or a violent dog. So the effect on the reader is very much that they're hoping that the Ruby will escape, and it makes the reader want to read on to discover. Remember, that's not a full sentence. It makes the reader want to read on to discover what happens to Ruby and to see if she escapes unscathed. Also, the repetition of the verb ran, the fact that it goes she ran, comma, ran, accentuates Ruby's panic. You know, it really highlights that the tornado is making her breathless. It really reflects how she's desperate to escape. So if you've struggled with that question, maybe you want to have a little go at another paragraph using that. Remember your sentence starter the writer uses to describe the tornado. For example, this shows a word, furthermore. You know those sentence starters, we use them all the time in class. So if you feel that you need to give a little bit more to your answer, maybe you want to have a look at that quote. Okay, I've just switched the video ever so slightly here so you can see a model paragraph here that's come from the exam board. So this would be heading to the top band. This would be a good answer. So the writer describes a tornado using an extended image of evil, but you could have put a symbolism of evil, a metaphor of evil, a simile of evil, whatever you want, but an extended image of evil. Ruby runs from it like the devil himself were chasing her, like all hell were biting at her ankles. And I've highlighted that section because those quotes are embedded. It runs in. It's not just dropped in, it runs into the sentence. The simile suggests that the tornado is a malevolent entity deliberately hunting her down and very close to success. If you're not sure what malevolent means, it means evil. The use of personification implies the tornado was alive, all-powerful and in control, intent on capturing Ruby and wreaking destruction in the process. When Ruby's bicycle is hooked up by the finger of the wind, it is as if the tornado has adopted a physical human form with a superhuman strength, capable of plucking up an inanimate object and transporting it to another world. So obviously that's a really good answer. So we're going to go on and look at the mark scheme to see why that would be top band. Okay, so let's have a look at top band there, because most of us should be between level 3 and level 4. So the top band says that the answer to get 7 to 8 is a detailed and perceptive understanding of language. So to get that, you have to look really closely at the quote and said very, very clearly what you think the author was trying to do. So using vague statements like it makes the reader feel sorry for Ruby, or it makes the reader feel worried for Ruby. That's quite vague. It's not saying why it makes the reader feel sorry for Ruby or worried for Ruby. So you've got to analyse the effects really carefully, going that word, that phrase very much makes the reader feel this way. Judicious textual detail means that you have picked your quotes incredibly carefully. You have picked short quotes, you've embedded it into your sentence, and you've really thought about what that quote does, and you're using sophisticated and accurate use of subject terminology. So actually knowing the technique. So if you're still at the stage where you're using a lot of this is imagery, that's absolutely fine for level 3, but to get the top marks is using phrases like semantic field, extended metaphor, and those kind of higher level devices. And level 3 is really simple. It just requires a clear and relevant explanation. The tornado is described as evil. The writer uses, for example, this shows, and that's dead straightforward. So everybody is capable of a level 3 answer, at least 5 marks. But to get those top grades, you really need to be using that sophisticated vocab and really talking about those quotes in detail. Okay, so obviously I've been doing this for 17 years and I know what an 8 looks like, I know what a 5 looks like, what a 2 looks like. You don't know that. But what I want you to do is I want you to try and give yourself a mark, have a look at your answer, compare it to the one that the examiner gave and give yourself a number. And then from that, have a look at the mark scheme and think, what could I do to improve that answer? What do I need to do next? So on the left of the screen there, you can see some examples like analyse the method used in greater depth or use embedded quotations. So pick a target and underneath your answer put, the target for this answer is this and I think I got this mark. So you know what to do next time. Okay, so let's have a look at question 3. So if you're one of our film students, this question's a piece of pie for you. Us mere mortals struggle a little bit. So question 3 is, you now need to think about the whole of the source. The text is the beginning of a novel. How has the writer structured the text to interest you as the reader? You could write about what the writer focuses your attention on at the beginning, how and why the writer changes the focus as the source develops, and any other structural features that interest you. So what's really important here is you are not talking about language devices. You're not talking about words. You're talking about what order the words have been put in and why. So you want to analyse the order of the events, where tension goes up or goes down, and any other structural features that you might notice. You need to consider about why the text has been put together the way it is and what effect that has had on the reader. The bullet points are really, really good here. They tell you exactly what to do. Beginning, middle, end, what changes as you go through. You're writing about 3 to 4 paragraphs for this question. Remember, I've said this to my classes multiple times, at least the beginning and the end if you're a slow writer. You have to cover the whole text to get out of band 2. Okay, so I'm going to give you a little bit of help with this one, so you can annotate along with me as I go. So at the start of this text, our main character is introduced. She's young and alone in a barren landscape. So very much at the start of the text, we're introduced to the main character. We've got this short sentence here in the second paragraph, but it was a good landmark. You've got to think about why maybe has the writer used that. In the third paragraph, the pace quickens dramatically within this longer paragraph describing the attack of the tornado, and that increases the tension as the stakes are raised. So that's the effect of that paragraph there. At the start of paragraph 4, the action slows down to reflect Ruby's confusion. So the writer zooms in on the fine details of the snake, emphasised by the use of the short sentence and a focus on the sentence alone. We then have a very close perspective on what Ruby can see and feel here. The slow motion is broken in paragraph 6, with suddenly everything becomes hyper-real and the pace picks up again. And this longer paragraph describes Ruby's actions. The longer sentences demonstrate her methodical and practical actions, and we are very impressed as a reader by that. The fact that, I'd lie down in a cave, we've talked about this before, but Ruby very much just gets on with it. Towards the end of this section, you get these one sentence paragraphs. The first one demonstrates Ruby moving away from the danger of the snake. The second moves our focus back to the tree and how it's been changed by the tornado's attack, suggesting a loss that may symbol or foreshadow Ruby's injury, but also make us feel really relieved that she actually found a safe place to hide, even though she did get bit by a snake. Finally, this one sentence paragraph of introducing the character of the farmer, it's also dramatic and reduces the tension right down because we now know that Ruby is likely to be saved. We're hoping that he's going to save Ruby. And then finally, this last section introduces the character of the doctor. Just the introduction of the doctor, this creates real relief for the reader. A trained medical professional is now introduced, and this dialogue really highlights how he knows what he's doing and she is being saved. In the final sentence, we zoom out. We are no longer experiencing things from Ruby's point of view or even the current time. It's instead a retrospective, this omniscient narrative, the all-seeing author who resolves to the reader what Ruby has learned from this experience. So before I let you have a go at this question, Okay, here is a model paragraph on the exam board. So the text is structured so that the reader can experience the encounter between a young girl and the hostile environment in which she finds herself. So I've referenced my structural feature. I am now going to reference my evidence. So at the beginning, our focus is on a single character. So there's my structural feature, the focus on the single character, 13-year-old Ruby and her thoughts of potential danger. She was never going to make it to the ranch before the storm struck, and there's my quotation. We then zoom out to see a panoramic view of a wide open space, a barren landscape that emphasises how exposed Ruby is and therefore how disastrous a tornado could be for her. Time is then used, so I've got another structural device there, time, so I've gone from the zoom out and the panoramic view and I've now shifted to time. Time is then used as a structural feature as we narrow down to her thoughts once more and travel back in time as Ruby recalls a memory of the area that provides a solution to her current predicament, a safe place between some rocks to shelter from the tornado. In this way, her internal thoughts determine the external action. So the key part of this is what is happening in each section and why. Okay, so we've had a bit of an outfit change because I've had to film this over 2 days. So we're carrying on with our structure question. So when you answer this one, you want to choose the features that you have the most to say about. Remember, I always tell you the highest leverage section that you can find. From the beginning, the middle and end. Remember, my slow writers just do the beginning and end if that's all you can manage in the time allocated. So you're going to be writing out your ideas into about 3 paragraphs, maximum 4. So each paragraph is what, how, why, but it's what structural features use, how is that structural features used, and what is the effect of that structural feature on the reader. So you've got some sentence starters there that might help you. At the beginning, we are introduced to, our focus then shifts to, we then narrow in on, by the end of the source, tension is relieved by. So you should spend about 12 minutes maximum on this question, so you can go ahead and practice that one now. Okay, so be having a look at your answer, and then let's have a little look at this mark scheme. So to get a level 4, a top band response, your response needs to be perceptive, detailed, and perceptive, detailed analysis. So what does that look like? That you have analysed the effect of the writer's choice of structural features, so that you've gone, the writer has focused on the setting at the start for this purpose, and this is the effect of using that. You've used a judicious range of examples, so you've carefully selected what you're looking at, the most important, and you're using a sophisticated and accurate use of subject terminology. So you have to be using the correct techniques, zoom in, foreshadowing, structural. You have to be using the techniques, not just beginning, middle and end. To get a level 3, which most of us will be aiming for, is clear, relevant explanation. So you explain clearly, although maybe quite simply, the effect of the writer's choice of structural devices. Maybe why it begins a certain way, why it ends a certain way. You've got a range of relevant examples. So you've got a number of examples, so at least 3 or 4, but maybe they're not as carefully selected as they could have been, and that you're still using a clear and accurate subject terminology. Even at level 2, you'll see there that you have to use some use of subject terminology. So if you're not, you need to go back to your exercise books. What are those structural devices? Can you name them and talk about their effect? So have a look back at your answer, and then using that mark scheme, give yourself a target. What do you need to improve next? Okay, so down the left hand side here, there's a few different choices that you can use, but give yourself a target. What band do you think you'd be in? Is that a level 2 response? Is it a level 4? And what do you think your targets might be? Now, this is the big question on the paper. The 20 marker is worth the most. And I think it's relatively easy. If you remember to do one thing, you must talk about the language features. Do not forget them, or the structural features, but you've got to talk about language and structural features. So it's the second highest value on the paper. So writing is 40, this is 20. It's worth the same as question 1, 2 and 3 together, so you've got to make sure you get to it. Stick to those timings, get to question 4. It will always tell you to focus your part of an answer on the second half of the source, and it'll give you a section. Make sure you select that section, line 17 at the end in here. So use your highlighter in the exam so you know what you're looking for, and it will always be a student says. So in this case, a student said, this part of the text when Ruby is bitten by a snake shows how clever she is. You have got to say, I know she is clever because of the language and structural devices used. The writer has used certain words, certain phrases, certain structural devices to give you the impression that she is clever. So therefore you've got to talk about what gave you that impression. Okay, so you've got to prove it or disprove it using the language features as your evidence. So what I want you to do now, read through the source again from line 17, and I want you to highlight any key information that demonstrates Ruby's behaving in a clever or resourceful way. So the first thing you need to do is highlight any information that shows that she is behaving in a clever or resourceful way. Okay, so clever can mean lots and lots of different things. Intelligent, resourceful, methodical, smart, intellectual, quick-witted, practical, rational. Find anything that shows that she is those things from the section you are looking at. Okay, so you've got five quotations on here that really show that she's resourceful. This big long one here, I think it shows that she's really clever because of all the verbs that are used. She tried to steady her breathing, she reached for the notebook, she tucked it inside her pocket. She'd done all these things after just being bit by a snake. She's really, really organised, she really knows what to do. That shows she's clever and resourceful. You know, the fact that she moves slowly, even though her instinct must be to panic, carefully holding her arm, that shows that she's resourceful because she's trying to prolong her life. She's trying to make sure she doesn't die. So the adverb slowly really shows her determination. I love from that day on, that kind of hint of the future, that structural device there that moves us forward into the future, shows that Ruby's identified a weakness and she decides to make it into a strength. She recognises that she didn't know what the snake was, and she's never going to let that mistake again. So go through these 5 quotations, identify language and structural devices, and what are the effects of those structural devices on the reader? How does it show to the reader that Ruby is really, really clever? You should be ready now to write your response. So just to remind you what you're going to do. You've identified where in the source Ruby is behaving cleverly. You should have, from the quotations I selected for you, identified the methods within these places that demonstrate her cleverness. You should then go on and do your what, how, why paragraph saying how those techniques show that Ruby is clever. You can, if you want, use a counter argument. I think there's only one instance here where she doesn't hear the hissing of the snake. That could be argued that she's not that intelligent or not that clever. If you feel like you want to do that, but it's not necessary. And you're going to be writing about 4 to 6 paragraphs this time. At least 20 minutes writing, and you're going to be talking about both the language and structural features. Remember, this is a combination of question 2 and question 3 together. So how do the language and structural features make the reader understand that Ruby is clever? So off you go, get that written now. Okay, so you've got my model on the screen now. So this is what I have written in response to this question. So look at my first sentence. Ruby's reaction to the snake bite shows how clever she is. So I've clearly responded to the statement. I am saying that Ruby is clever. She has physical symptoms almost immediately, a sharp pain followed by a sickening ache, and she has to try and steady her breathing. But despite this, she has the presence of mind to reach for the notebook and pencil she had tucked inside her pocket. So my quotations are embedded and they are judicious. I've selected them carefully in order to record details of the snake. This demonstration of composure suggests that she is both quick-witted and level-headed. The fact that she even carries a notebook and her pencil implies she is always prepared for an emergency, another indication of her intelligence. So I have used judicious quotations. I've talked about what these quotations have taught me as a reader. I've not really explained explicitly any language or structural devices, but I have said that this is a demonstration of composure. So I'm talking about the words and phrases used, but I've not exactly said what the techniques are. However, I very much do that in the next paragraph, as you'll see. The writer varies the pace of events, so that's a structural device, to highlight Ruby's cleverness. At this point in the text, the action is moving quite slowly, so we can absorb just how cleverly Ruby is behaving, but then the pace speeds up with a short paragraph about the farmer who drove by an hour later, and then a switch to the doctor on duty in the local hospital. This enables the reader to more quickly focus on the detailed exchange at the end between Ruby and the doctor, where she produces a perfect drawing of a western rattlesnake, and he is able to inject the correct antivenom. This confirms how clever Ruby is because her calm, quick and sensible action has saved her life. So there's a really detailed analysis there of how pace is used in the text. So I think I would score quite highly there. Let's have a look at the mark scheme. So what do you think I'd get? Would I get level 4, perceptive, detailed evaluation? Do you think I've been perceptive? I'm not convinced I've said the most intelligent things, but it certainly was detailed. Have I evaluated critically and talked about the effects of those techniques on the reader? I think I did that. Have I showed a perceptive understanding of the method? So have I really explained well and understood why the text was organised the way it was in terms of the pace? Are my quotations judicious, carefully selected? Is it a convincing and critical response? Now, I think I'm edging into that. I'm not convinced it would be top band. It's certainly level 3. I think it's between a level 3 and a lower level 4 answer because it's definitely clear and relevant. I've evaluated very clearly what the effect of these devices on the reader. I've definitely shown an understanding of the writer's methods, although I've only specifically mentioned pace. There are a range of textual references and I have responded clearly to the statement. I think where I'm maybe straddling level 4 is the fact that my response to the statement is really clear. So this is our last task. Using the mark scheme, give yourself a mark out of 8 and give yourself a specific target directing you on how to improve your answer. Get that done now. Thank you very much for participating.